It's important to start an illustration with good reference. So for this example, all I need is blue car paint and polished carbon fiber. So I got both of those things in a few different lighting situations, and I'm going to use those as my reference. The local color is going to be blue for the paint, and then a bit of a repeat pattern for the carbon fiber. So I'll be using a photo for this. So I've got my bits document on the right and my working canvas on the left. And I like to start outside of the layer mask. So I'll make a new layer, pull it outside of the layer mask, and then I'll drag my carbon fiber onto that new layer. I'm just going to check and make sure it looks good with the multiply blending mode. And then once I'm happy with it, I'll make sure to make a safe copy. So there what you see is I've just duplicated my save copy, and then I'll take the duplicate and warp it into perspective. And since warping things into perspective is going to be done over and over in this process, I'll be jumping ahead here and there. It's very important though to be able to do this process correctly, because if you were to simply overlay one of these photo textures on top of your image, it would really flatten it. You have to make sure you reference the form. So if the form is at an angle, you have to correctly modify the perspective of your photo overlay. And once you get all of them correctly in perspective, you can make them a single layer and start to cut them out. So here I've just lowered the opacity to help me see where the borders are and to trim off the extra. Now I happen to be using the pen tool, but you could use the polygon lasso if you preferred. I think the pen tool gives you the most precise outline, and then when you convert it to a selection, you can invert that selection and trim out the rest. The value of the carbon fiber when seen at a steep angle is going to be much lighter because of its glossy reflection. So I'm going to begin putting this into my image with a soft round brush and a very light color, almost pure white. I'm not worrying about the boundaries of this shape at this point because I'm going to trim it down later. So I just want to make sure I get the value transition correct. Now I've jumped ahead and applied a mask to that layer, and so I can mask out where the edges of that highlight shape are. So I'm not destroying the layer itself, but rather just redefining the edge. And if you want to learn more about masking, there's a lot of videos on this on controlpaint.com. So here I'm masking out the seam lines as well. And this just means I'm painting with black in the mask thumbnail. So white will bring the layer back, black will hide it away. And as a glossy material like this bends around a corner, it often picks up some of the highlight. So I'm going to use color dodge layers to create the under blue glow, using the soft round brush with click, shift click to pull nice straight lines. And then I'll make opaque normal layers on top and paint with just white, pure white. And here again I'm using click, shift click to pull those nice long straight lines. Since I just ignored those panel borders, I'm going to need to mask them out. But the highlight's on a couple different layers, so I'm going to need to do layer set masking. And this is where you have a single layer set that contains a variety of layers, all of which receive the same mask. So here I'll make a new layer set and put those last two layers inside of it. Now when I paint in that mask, anything inside the layer set will receive it. So I paint out these panel borders, and both the blue and white highlight layers are hidden away. This is really useful, especially as your document gets bigger. And when it comes to glossy materials, a good deal of the realism comes from the reflected environment. And this is not simply reflected color, but actual objects that you can see and maybe tell where the object sits. So I open up my bits document again, and I have a photo of a factory ceiling. And this is going to give some implied space, like this shiny box is sitting somewhere inside of a factory. So here I'll lay it outside of my layer set and then make sure to correct for perspective. So once again, the distort tool. And I've made a safe copy because I'm going to be doing this on a couple different planes, as you can see. And once I've corrected for perspective, I'll use a mask and hide away some of the layer. So here I'm switching back and forth between white and black to paint away and then bring back some of this layer until I find a nice happy balance. This is where masking really shines. So here I'll hide the little last bit that escaped me. And every so often I'm going to want to check and see how I'm doing. So I'll zoom out, step away, and then zoom back in. I'll repeat the process on the next face, skip ahead a bit, and this time I'm using the warp command, which is another part of free transform, and this allows me to give a bit of a curvilinear quality to it, because it's a curved surface, not simply a flat surface. So I'll correct for perspective, pull it inside the layer set, apply a new layer mask, and begin to hide away some of the layer. These are also good because later in the document, if you realize maybe you want a little more of that reflective quality, you can reveal some more of the layer mask because it's not destructive. If you were to simply use the eraser tool, you wouldn't have the ability to come back and add more of the reflection later. So for the time being, I'm going to keep this pretty subtle. I don't want too overwhelming of reflections. After all, this isn't chrome, it's more like car paint. And I need one more copy for the side perpendicular face of the box. And I'll repeat the same correcting for perspective process one more time here. And now once I got it in place, I'll make a mask on it, pull it inside the layer set, and pull it back a bit through using the masking. This side I'm going to keep especially subtle. I'm going to end up darkening in this side with some more shadows, so really I just want some indication of reflected environment. If you've watched the basic rendering for Photoshop series, you know that values and form are incredibly important. And right now my drawing's feeling a little bit flat, so I need to increase the shadows. I'll begin to do this using the polygon lasso, defining the area that I want to darken with shadow. Once I have my area selected, I'll then paint inside of it using multiply layers and the soft round brush. So I'm really just selectively darkening to add a little emphasis and make the highlights pop more. And again, this is information that can be found in the basic rendering for Photoshop. So if you haven't watched that series yet, it's probably a good idea to do so. I'm also going to apply some darker shadows to the base of the form to give it a better grounded feel, as well as that side, the perpendicular face. And I'll erase away what I don't need using the soft round eraser. A quick look at my reference will show that the highlight color sometimes changes where there's extremely illuminated. So here it gets a little bit teal. Well, I'm going to do the same thing in my image using color dodge layers. I'll start on the edge of the form using click, shift click to pull those nice straight edges. And then I'll make another color dodge layer and I'll paint in with a larger, soft round brush. So here you can see that the color blending mode gives an interesting glowing effect. I find that this is a great use for color dodge. It can be hard to use sometimes, but for glowing metal, it can be really nice. With extremely glossy materials like this, you can actually see the light fixtures themselves reflected. So if you take a look at the reference, the sports car actually shows what kind of light fixtures are on the ceiling. So I'm going to replicate this inside of my material. To do so, I'm going to start with an oval because that's the shape of the light. And I'll fill this with a solid white. Below this layer, after I deselect, I'll get a soft brush and add in some of that glowing warmth that was apparent in the reference. So here I'm choosing sort of a golden orange color, and I've set it to linear dodge, or add, blending mode. I'm going to take a look at the reference and compare the two to see how I'm doing. So I'll put the two windows next to each other and take a look. I can tell immediately that the shape is a little wrong, and it's also a little bit too sharp. So I'll use the Gaussian blur to soften it up a bit. About half a pixel should be fine. Once I'm happy, I'll flatten these two together so I have a single layer that's my hot, light source reflection. Once I've got this one, I can duplicate it around the form, holding down the Alt key and using the Move tool. So this will allow me to just make it once nicely, and then to make copies to save time. It's important though to take these copies and to correct them for perspective, the same way you would with a photo overlay. And then once they're all in place, you're going to need to bring those panel borders back. So for this, I'm going to actually draw opaque with almost black over top. So I'm going to use a real narrow brush and carefully paint in these panel borders. And since I'm getting near the end of my painting, I'm not going to mask anymore. I'm just going to paint these straight over top. And it's nice to bring definition back to certain areas of your model at the very end, and it'll just add some sharpness. And then underneath them, I'm doing a little illusion here. I'm just making the corners pop a bit by putting some reflected light around those edges. And this is a bit of a cheat, but it'll just draw attention to those seam borders. So if you remember the earlier video where I talked about the importance of low local contrast, now I'm going to put that into my model. Especially here where the carbon fiber has all the striping, it can be a bit distracting. So I'm going to average that out a bit with a new normal layer on top of the stack. So I've selected the darker color, and I'm brushing it on with a soft round brush very slowly and gently. The key here is subtlety, and I'm erasing away on the top plane what I don't need, but I just want to knock it back a bit, make it less pronounced. And I'm still leaving those highlights on the edges. Now here on the same plane, I'm going to make it a little bit lighter, but the idea is the same. I'm going to average it out and make it lower contrast. So in certain ways, I'm just getting rid of some of the details that I added earlier, but it's not a total loss. I'm just adjusting where the viewer is going to look in the image, and I don't want everything to be calling out for attention all the time. It's too distracting. So here I'll hide it and then show it again so you can see what I've done. Makes it feel a little bit more volumetric and is just less distracting in general. And even if I want low contrast locally, I still want good image-wide or global contrast. So what I'm going to do is make an adjustment layer called Levels. And this is just like the Levels filter, except for it applies to everything below it, all the layers. And also I can modify it later on. So now that I've gotten nearly to the end of my illustration, it's time to put on some finishing touches, some polish. And in this lighting scenario, it's okay to have some glowing highlights, because after all, this is sort of on the showroom floor. So I'm going to be working outside of my layer set, so the mask won't apply anymore. I can draw outside the lines. I'm going to set my flow down to very low, 10%, and just select the color of the highlight and paint a little bit outside the lines. This is sort of an optical trick that your eyes do when they see a very bright light next to a darker background. It's just going to add a little bit of realism, a little extra something. This is one of those things that's hard to modify around, so it's really good to do on a separate layer and to do at the end of your painting. So you can see how that adds just a little extra glow, which can give a nice effect. Now, I don't know if you noticed before, but on my bits document, I had a handle from a blue car. Well, this is the sort of thing where you can take a few little pieces from a photo and add a lot of realism to your illustration. And since I knew going in that I'd have sort of a blue car paint, adding in a man-made handle would just give it a little something extra to sell the image. This will just add a little extra believability. So I drag one in, scale it properly, and adjust for perspective. And once I'm happy with the one, then I'll just duplicate it 2 more times and adjust for perspective on them as well. This is just like photo overlays, except it's 100% opaque. So obviously this won't work a lot, but occasionally you can put a little bit here and there from a photo straight into your illustration. And it's amazing what a difference it can make. So at this point, I'm ready to call it done. And you could work on the details forever. But for this concept, I've got enough surface information to to make it really read.